Hello there, and welcome to my series The Unfinished Arcs of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. In this video, we'll be covering the 9th unfinished story arc, the Yuuzhan Vong, or more accurately and less commonly known as the Clone Wars X-Files Abduction story arc. Please note there will be spoilers for Thrawn Alliances, The Bad Batch, and Ahsoka. Back in 2014, this was the 11th unfinished story arc, but due to the completion of Ahsoka's Walkabout and The Bad Batch in 2020, it has now become the 9th. Taking up production code 713-716, this story arc would have been the 3rd story arc of the full 20-episode 8th and final season. Consisting of episodes 9 to 12, this story would have ramped up the scale again, showing another investigation-style story in a similar vein to Crystal Crisis on Utapau. This story arc would have aired in the fall/autumn of 2015 had production continued as planned. As the title suggests, this story involved the Yuuzhan Vong. Sadly, the writer for the story arc was never officially revealed. When this arc was in its pitching and scripting stages, the canon of Star Wars was different to how it is now, that being of a tier system. First off, we had the top of the list being the G canon that consisted of the 6 live-action movies. Then we had the T canon, standing for television canon, that included shows like The Clone Wars. The following 3 tiers were used for the expanded universe. First is the C canon, which was used for recent expanded media. It standed for continuity canon, with elements of the C canon being brought into both the G canon and the T canon with the prequels and the Clone Wars. The second is the S canon, stood for secondary canon. It could be used or disregarded depending on the specific details, with this mostly being used for older material that had been deemed inconsistent with newer projects. And the last one is N canon, which was used for stuff that is outright not considered canon, such as deleted scenes that have not been referenced in other material. There was one more tier that was created called D canon, that was meant for Star Wars detours, but since that show was never released and ceased development, that tier never got used. Lucas himself referred to his work and the EU as 2 worlds, with the EU being a parallel universe to his own. Despite having this canon tier system, Lucas apparently told Dave Filoni when creating the Clone Wars to ignore the expanded universe anyway, which I assume was to allow more stories to be told within this new medium. While this was the case, it is clear that some of the 2003 Micro Clone Wars show is counted as having happened in the continuity of the 2008 Clone Wars, with Ki-Adi-Mundi mentioning Mace Windu on Dantooine, as well as Anakin and Obi-Wan already knowing Ventress. In 2014, this canon system was thrown out in favour of a new system. On-screen project credited to Lucas, being the 6 movies and the 5.5 seasons of the Clone Wars, were used as a template for a new canon, while everything else was rebranded as Star Wars Legends, essentially removing them from having any canon status, while also ending the expanded universe's stories. All new projects going forward would then be regarded as part of this new canon, with Lucasfilm's story group being created to make sure that a general continuity was kept. As was the case with the canon tier system beforehand, this new canon system has not escaped inconsistencies between media, to the point where the story group now regards Star Wars as a mythology, with multiple different accounts of the same event happening. This has caused fans to create their own tier system, like the one we had before the 2014 change, to where stuff like the live-action movies and TV shows take precedent over stuff like novels and comics. With the print versions of previous unfinished arcs, Dark Disciple, Son of Dathomir and Saving Boss having alterations done to specific details within each of their stories, suggesting only their core stories are canon to on-screen events. This story arc has the distinction for being the one we know the very least about, not even knowing who its main set of characters would have been. The most obvious known detail about this story arc was that it would have brought the Yuuzhan Vong from the C canon into the T canon, but just like what happened with the Mandalorians, aspects about the Yuuzhan Vong would have been changed. To fit with Lucas's vision, the Yuuzhan Vong would have not been immune to the Force. The Yuuzhan Vong would have actually had a very minimal presence in this story, acting as the de facto aliens in a story inspired by the X-Files, with Dave's sketch showing a Yuuzhan Vong scout ship abducting a Republic Venator, with them wanting to study and find out what the Jedi were, as well as assess the strength of the Republic. The arc would have not delved into the origins of the Yuuzhan Vong, beyond merely suggesting that they were from another galaxy. It is highly likely this arc was intended to be a nod to the EU New Jedi Order stories with the Vong, showing that they have been lurking in the shadows for quite some time, waiting for the right time to emerge. At the time of the show's cancellation, this was one of 6 story arcs alongside Return to the Jedi, Saving Voss, Rex and R2 Top Gun, Return to Mon Cala, and The Siege of Mandalore that only had draft scripts written for it. Being a part of the 7th production season that sadly never got any visual development for it, beyond sketches by Dave Filoni during the pitching of the story. This story arc is the second out of 2 that only has a single piece of imagery release for it, that being the Dave sketch mentioned earlier. I think it's most likely that the Jedi who would have gone on the investigation to discover what happened to the missing Venator and Jedi would have been Obi-Wan and Anakin, who would take on a Mulder and Scully set of roles, mirroring their investigation from Crystal Crisis on Utapau. This brings me to, I think, the writer of this arc is, with the investigation vibe it would have taken on being similar to Crystal Crisis, as well as a certain writer on the Clone Wars having written on the X-Files itself. I believe the most likely candidate for this arc's writer is Daniel Arkin, with him most likely having written one arc for the previous 6th production season, and this one for the 7th production season. One thing I wonder about this story arc is whether we'd have some involvement of Palpatine, Dooku, and the Separatists. There was an arc planned where Dooku would have been captured by clones. If possible, this would have been the Venator that was abducted and could have caused Dooku to escape in the chaos. But it's most likely this plot was scrapped from an existing story arc, like the Season 6 Inhibitor Chip one. It's probable that the Jedi Council would have not involved Palpatine due to this most likely being considered a Jedi matter, like the Quinlan Voss situation, though due to an entire Venator going missing, it could have been brought to his attention eventually. This arc would most likely be only one of a few story arcs where the general viewer doesn't know the villain, giving it a mysterious vibe. This story arc could give us some more light on the current members of the Jedi Council, maybe showing us Stas Ali for the first time, explaining that Depa Billaba decided to step down from the council to focus on training Kanan. Though originally, it's possible she could have been killed off at some point within the unfinished story arcs to make way for Stas to take her council seat before Kanan was created. It would also continue to show us how Shark T has since left her post at Kamino, like in Crystal Crisis, Dark Disciple and Saving Voss, with her being replaced with an unknown Jedi that ultimately died during Order 66. With Grand Admiral Thrawn having connections to the Yuuzhan Vong in Legends, I cannot help but think of a possible canon replacement for them being the Grisk from the Thrawn Alliance's novel. Established as monitoring both sides of the war and even making a deal with Dooku to provide him with the lightsaber-resistant material known as Cortosis, the Grisk seemed like the best candidate to replace the Vong in a new canon version of this story. It is established in the new Thrawn trilogy that a Grisk attack on the galaxy is imminent, while it's also not clear whether they know what the Force is or whether Dooku is a Sith, which would line up with this unfinished arc of them abducting a Jedi in an attempt to learn what they are. Differences from the Vong include the Grisk not using biotech, not being Force immune, and not originating from another galaxy. These differences, alongside their design in the recently released Thrawn Alliance's comic, could potentially go against them being a potential replacement for the Vong in this arc. It is still possible that they could keep the Yuuzhan Vong in this story and just imply they have a canon invasion set in some unknown time in the future, or have them decide against invading the galaxy for one reason or another. The Ahsoka show confirms the existence of other galaxies in on-screen media, with the one in that show established to contain some sort of mysterious entity that calls out to Balin. While this entity is connected to the Mortis gods, with some people theorising it could mean the canonization of Abeloth, that doesn't prevent this said galaxy also potentially being the origin of a canon version of the Yuuzhan Vong. With both Mortis and the Night Sisters being strong in the Force, the potential for the Vong to be brought into the current canon with their Force immunity intact is still a possibility. The fact that this galaxy also doesn't seem to contain any known Jedi besides besides the relics of the Mortis gods, it's possible that the Vong being from this galaxy could explain their lack of knowledge of the Jedi. Going back to the idea of clones being involved in this story arc, it's also possible that Gregor would have returned in this story, though it's less likely than the previous Rex and R2 arc, with it being a possibility that he is the only survivor of the abduction, somewhat explaining why he has gone mad since he was last seen in Season 5, though it's more likely that it's just a side effect of his head trauma from the explosion he was in. This story arc could have put a focus on the darker side of the Republic, showing some secret experiment lab like Mount Tantis, where Palpatine is doing secret experiments behind the Jedi's back. This could have been what inspired the story with Hemlock in The Bad Batch. A possible premise for this story arc could be that a Republic science officer under orders from Palpatine is working with the mysterious Yuuzhan Vong, with the Vong having something Palpatine wants. The Vong themselves want a Jedi in return, so a lesser known to the audience, or a new Jedi character created for the story arc, like Master Tuin in Crystal Crisis on Utapau, is lured into a trap and the Venator thereon goes missing. The Jedi Council become aware of this when this particular Jedi does not report back after some time. Wanting to discover what happened to the Jedi, Anakin and Obi-Wan become Mulder and Scully when the Jedi Council send them on an investigation to uncover the truth. Here we will most likely see the previously stated Republic science officer cover up the severity of the situation, potentially exclaiming they don't know what happened to the Jedi, as well as covering up the full extent of the operation. Obi-Wan and Anakin can find the abducted Venator in space, abandoned, and would have to search it to discover what happened. It's possible that they never fully uncover the mystery themselves, with the abducted Jedi either potentially taking the evidence of the Vong to their grave, having only bits and pieces of their memory, or having no memory of the encounter at all. The Vong in this scenario would be very minimally featured, just like what Lucasfilm officially said, as we wouldn't see who they are, only that the Jedi got abducted by one of their scout ships. As we only have a Dave sketch for this story due to how this arc never got past draft scripts, it's possible that we'd have not actually fully seen a member of the Vong in the episodes themselves, and that Dave sketch was just to show the writer what the mysterious alien abducting force actually was. If we did see the Vong themselves, it could be in brief scenes where they are experimenting on the abducted Jedi, which could have been lit in such a way that they're shrouded in a bit of mystery. If this is the scenario for this unfinished arc, and if it ever gets finished, they could retroactively make the science officer Hemlock himself, with the Jedi discovering what happened by the end potentially causing Palpatine to pin the blame on him, thus explaining why he was expelled from the Republic Science Corps. This could have Hemlock take on the role as the Clone Wars' version of the X-Files' cigarette-smoking man. In this case, there is also potential for Emery Carr to be added into this story arc, as we know that she has worked with Hemlock for many years preceding the Republic's transition into the Empire. This would be a nice bit of retroactive lore showing us more of Emery's past. Personally, this story arc is one of the ones I'd love to have finished. Being a fan of the X-Files, this arc is very intriguing to me with how little we know about it. Due to its hint to a future invasion, it is the best candidate to be the last arc of either a 2-season Clone Wars Legacy show or the end of a series of 90-minute Disney Plus Clone Wars specials, potentially ending the long-form Clone Wars on-screen content with a hint towards new stories set in a yet-to-be-explored era. With the conclusion of this story arc, the next would see a fight of the political system with the return of a character who is long overdue for the spotlight, Padmé Amidala. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.